And we are live. So welcome to this week's Hang-Ops. My name is Christopher Weber, for those that haven't been around recently. We're going to talk about OS packaging, although we're hoping Pete Cheslock pops in a little later and other folks join us. How are you doing, Joshua?
I'm good. I just gotta chill in my office. The air is chilly. It's unusual. We've had unseasonably warm weather for the last few days.
I don't understand it. Like, it's been all over the place recently. Like, we'll go from like, I don't know, high of like 60. So today it's kind of hazy outside. Later this week we're going to be in the 80s. Like, I just don't understand the back and forth.
Climate change.
All right. So I feel like Brandon had something that, like, this started somewhere. OS packaging is one of those things that it's just nothing good can come of it. It feels like.
Well, fortunately, there's only 17 different competing standards for making packages.
Well, and like I that part I don't get, right? Like and it's funny because you get, so first off, there's the OS packaging discussion. Then there's the discussions that get into like the specific like programming languages. So whether it be CPAN or Ruby gems or the 5 that Python uses.
Yeah, I love the thing about Python. What's easy install? It's a system for installing packages. What's pip? A system for installing packages.
What I find the most hilarious about this is that Python fundamentally, like, they are, of all the organizations or all the programming languages, very much so there is a way to do something versus, like, you expect Ruby to have like 30 different packaging formats because, like, in Ruby there's like 30 different ways to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there's basically one. Like, I
Yeah,
don't know anything other than gems.
there is.
Okay, that's not
It's
true. Like,
standardized on it.
back in the old school days of like Puppet, when I was deploying that, I like rage quit at some point and stopped trying to use Ruby gems, and I just dropped Puppet, like the actual, as my installer would just drop the files into site Ruby because that seemed like the best thing at the time.
Yeah, there was the setup RB, but I think that has been like that functionality people have converted to workflows within the gem tooling within Ruby. A thing that really helped Ruby was getting Ruby gems into the standard library as the standard way of doing it, and that way it's built into the language, and so you have it anywhere you install the language.
Exactly, and like it was interesting. So recently, so are you familiar with Ruby Rogues, Octi
Yes.
Grim? So
Yep.
Octi has a thing called Ruby Tapas,
It
and
sure does.
um, for one reason or another, I've been trying to become a better developer,
Hmm.
and I've been watching Ruby Tapas, and he did a video on like how libraries get loaded and
Hmm.
where Ruby Gems actually comes from. What's neat about it is it's still separate, but it's packaged along with it, so it
Yeah.
gets loaded by default. But understanding how those load paths work was really interesting.
Yep.
Um, okay, so I will start the discussion around OS packaging. So given language runtimes, that's probably the biggest killer, right? Is we seem to be decently good at packaging up libc, maybe not shipping it without vulnerabilities, but that's another story,
Well, yeah. It's only a vulnerability if you have a cool logo and a website and a domain name to go with it.
right? Um, so it was interesting to me because, in fact, I've got to deal with it today. So we're looking at some older website stuff that still has Ruby 187 attached to it,
Hmm.
and looking at bumping that up to, well, like my inner Rubyist wants 2.1.5 because why wouldn't you run 2.1.5? Uh,
Exactly. Except for the
But
part where every gem that you have installed on your 187 is going to break and explode.
it actually, so as a note, like I pulled down that repo and
Yeah.
blew away the gemfile.lock
Yeah.
and changed versions and ran bundle install, and it just worked. I was like, woohoo!
Oh yeah, sure. You get the installation, that'll work. But what about running the tests?
Tests? What are tests? There are no tests.
This is a Ruby project. It's totally test driven. You've got like 5 different test frameworks in there all at once, right?
Oh, this sounds like a
Because you have
classic.
Cucumber and RSpec and yeah, I guess there's really only two, but there's a lot
Well,
of test focus in the Ruby community for sure.
well, no, totally. And it's funny because like that's one of the things that's been interesting to kind of watch the maturity of Chef is that
Mhm.
idea of you'll pull down an older something that's evolved over time, and first you'll look at some of the code and it will have puppet mannerisms because it was written at that era, if you will.
Hmm. Or written
And
by somebody who used to use Puppet,
yep,
like yours
and
truly.
yeah, me too, right? Like there was something the other day that I just like I had to take that step back and go,
Mhm.
oh, why am I trying to do that? It doesn't make sense to do that this way in Chef. I
Mhm.
think on the Ruby Rogues, David Brady talks frequently about that idea uh, of writing Java in Ruby.
Mhm.
You come from that other language and you start doing it. But going back to programming languages, right? Like you upgrade through things and ugh. But there's not really a good way for multiple versions of Ruby to exist on a system. Um, and it's always interesting to me where you run into, like, if you're on a rel box, one of the first things you learn is you don't touch Python. Like the system Python is holy and gets left off to the side. It's kind of like it's no different than in Solaris. Like the system Perl install, like you don't touch the system Perl install.
Right.
And I don't know. Is this a problem that can even be solved? I almost wonder. Like I know how we've solved it at Chef, but and how Puppet is looking to solve it going forward as well. But I wonder if um, I wonder is there is this a solvable problem, right?
No.
No.
So
So
there.
clearly.
So it's an interesting thing because every every different platform has a different suite of tools, or sorry, a different suite of runtimes that are needed for whatever scripting language is the primary one used for managing that system. So
Mhm.
Debian has a lot of tooling that is written in C and in Perl. Red Hat has a lot of tooling that's written in Python. I'm sure that there's a distribution out there that has a lot of tooling that's written in in Ruby, but obviously two popular config management tools are written in Ruby, and that's driven quite a lot of Ruby usage. That Rails is crazy popular, has driven its usage. Um, the problem with those interpreted languages is that the language interpreter runtimes can change dramatically, and that competes with the stable core that the various operating systems want to have. Um, you have like Red Hat 5, which I think has Python 2.4, and I believe that Python 3.3 or 3.4 or something like that is the current release, and there's lots of changes along the way, and
Mhm.
so you can't have another Python on your Red Hat 5 system. I mean, you totally can, but it's not really an easy thing to go about. You have to add third-party repositories and go through all that, or build your own repositories and build your own packages and that sort of thing. So then if you have, okay, so that's cool for Python on Red Hat, but what if you have Python on Debian and then Python on Windows and other things, because you have multiple different kinds of platforms running in your environment, and you need to install your Python specific tools or whatever.
That exactly. And like I don't know. First off, I've said like a lot of times. I feel like a Valley girl. Um,
Well, you do live in the greater Los Angeles area, don't you?
I do.
See?
Not
So,
very close to Los Angeles by. Los Angeles standards, but we'll go with that.
Southern California.
I get LA TV stations. How is that?
There you go.
Uh, but it's interesting. So the world I came from in Solaris land was packaging. LOL, what? Like those are a thing?
Oh, Solaris
So,
totally has packages.
well, in fact, quite frankly, in some ways, I miss the Solaris packaging system because I figured out how it worked finally. And
Yep.
it's like in Puppet, I could just point it at a URL. Like you don't, there's no repo, there's no nothing. It's just go shove a package on an HTTP endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's some great drinking stories to go along with my adventures into trying to get it cryptographically signed, but we won't go there. Um, so yeah, like you can do that in Puppet, or I'm sorry, in Sun, Solaris, can't even talk. But none of us did it. Like everybody I knew, it was, oh, we're just going to mount all this shit from NFS.
Huh, yeah. There was definitely that. I had
Well,
my share of share. I had my time with running NFS servers to get stuff across, but at IBM, which is where I ran Solaris, there wasn't a whole lot of using NFS on customer systems because security things.
mhm,
Um, it was a huge exemption to get that going, but most of the tooling that we had to install was built by the global tools team that
mhm,
built Solaris packages through whatever release process that they had for us to consume. Um, the team I worked on primarily either consumed those or got the packages from the vendor site like WebLogic or Veritas
mhm.
Cluster or whatever those were. And for things uh, that we hand rolled on our like internal infrastructure boxes, we just built a tarball and shipped the tarball around.
Well, it was crazy. So when I was at UC Riverside, we had this system called I don't even remember what it was called, but essentially you had like the current version symlinked to the current version for
Mm-hmm.
that architecture, and then the actual version was sitting uh, in an architecture because we supported both x86 and Spark. And at times it was interesting because you had stuff that had to be separated out, Sun 4U versus Sun 4V.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm making myself sound old because most people are like, huh, what?
No, I totally remember all that. I remembered that was a thing, rather. I've tried to forget all the old legacy stuff that I once knew, because like that'll just make me even more sad about the state of packaging systems. Especially as, internally at Chef, we build packages for Solaris, and we have build infrastructure for Solaris 9 specifically.
Do we really still support Solaris 9?
Solaris 9 Spark. We have packages that are built for Omnibus for it. I don't know how long those will continue to be supported because I don't think that Oracle is supporting Solaris 9 anymore. I'm fuzzy on that, but yeah, the infrastructure is there for doing it. Very nice.
And that's SCSA on Solaris 9.
Wow. Yeah,
I
Solaris 9 was new when I basically stopped doing Solaris stuff.
wow.
I moved over to AIX, which has its own different package format, BFFs. But as of AIX 5, they also support RPMs. So you can build RPM on Power, and it will work on AIX.
I haven't actually played with AIX. Like I've typed
Don't.
commands into AIX boxes and I've typed
Mhm.
commands into HPUX boxes,
Yeah.
but that's basically the extent.
Yeah. You have to get hardware, and it's like expensive hardware. It's the IBM, I guess, mini series type of. It's more than like your x86 server, but not quite your mainframes, right? So it's somewhere mini computing sort of deal. It's their Unix systems, so they're expensive, but not like mainframe expensive, but
Hmm.
not inexpensive like x86. So
Well,
yeah, getting the hardware is not easy, and they don't have like there isn't a go get a virtual machine on a public cloud of AIX systems, which would be super cool for testing purposes. But it's like a private. You have to get like a private vendor partnery thing to to do it. Pete Cheslock said he's on his way.
oh, awesome. Um, no, in fact, I think that was actually one of the cool things about Sun is that the resale market was so much there. You could pretty inexpensively pick up an Ultra 10 or an Ultra 60 and go to town and actually learn the sparks. Of all the things though that I miss, like I do miss Sun hardware because there were some things about Sun hardware that were just really nice.
Mm-hmm. A wild Pete Cheslock appears, or is that a Pete Chesbot?
I was tempted to actually send the URL to Pete Chesbot too, just to see what it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pete is in the cloud. He's thought littering from the cloud with his Amazon Web Services sweatshirt. He's figuring out how hardware works. We already went through that earlier. See, you should have been here earlier, Pete, and then you wouldn't have to do this, and we wouldn't have to banter about it.
So, what actually prompted this? Like, I know Brandon talked about something related to that.
Pete was lamenting that he had his he was 0 for 2 on conference proposals being accepted, so he was just going to do lightning talks about OS packaging.
Oh, okay.
And
that makes sense.
Somebody mentioned me, and I got roped into this because I have opinions.
I think you mentioned yourself because you said you have opinions.
I don't know. My dog has opinions like, hey, let me in the house, so I'm going to do that. But I got my headset,
Okay.
so it's cool.
And then Pete dropped in, I think is probably trying to, I have a feeling they changed something about the Google Hangouts stuff because my audio stopped working as well. Like I had to switch to a separate mic. Okay, how about now? You're unmuted.
Right. Can you guys hear
We
me?
can hear you.
Why can't I hear anyone else?
Check to make it sure. Oh, yeah, I'm sitting here talking to Pete while he can't hear me. Let me find the chat button.
Okay, I'm
So
back.
Pete can talk to us, but we can't talk to him apparently. And just because this is the appropriate time to say it, no one knows how computers work.
It's true. He's going to reboot. Okay. As one does.
I tried that earlier, and my mic is like still sitting on the desk because. And then I was going to switch to the other mic, and I ran out of time and realized that I'm missing the thing that it actually screws into.
Yeah, we had a conversation the other day about how Google Hangouts interfaces changed just enough the way that you start the Hangouts that we need to have like an internal video tutorial on how to do it, and then have that updated regularly because it changes. It's like, and I'm sure that it's super cool for people that are IMing with their friends and like, let's have a Hangout, and then they do that, and it's cool. But for this like ad hoc kind of meetings, I don't know. I don't think the interface is quite the same as it used to be.
I've really been happy with Zoom. And I was at a customer facility the other day, and their conference room supported SIP. So, like, we actually dialed in to SIP. It was badass because they had two monitors, and, like, the SIP client understood how that worked. So that when you shared your screen, on one of the screens, the the shared screen appeared. And what was
Nice.
even cooler was there was a panel on the table, and there were displays on the table. Like you couldn't see the person directly across from you, but there were panels. You could push a button and send one of the screens from the front of the room to the center displays. So, like, if you were doing a screen share, to make it easier for everybody to see the specific detail of the screen share, you could send it to the conference table, which was kind of neat. Like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it seems pretty good. I like it, but that has nothing to do with OS packages.
I know, but our OS packaging person isn't here, and
Yeah.
we wouldn't be systems administrators if we actually like talked about the topic at hand consistently. Because
I'm not a sysadmin anymore, though.
I
don't admin any systems.
I don't think I'm a sysadmin either at this point now, because I'm like a development lead thing.
Something. Yeah, titles are hard.
Yeah, we'll go with
You
it.
say you do here.
I saw your tweet earlier and was laughing because when I was on the community team, it was even harder to explain. Well,
Yep.
I tell people how awesome software is, and I buy them drinks. And are we working?
Yes, it works.
Reboot. All right, IT crowd wins again.
Oh my God. Aren't computers wonderful, everyone?
They are. We were just talking about how wonderful they are. But you weren't here to hear us, and you couldn't hear us when you were here, so.
It's funny because we're going to talk about how awesome computers are while Pete can't even get on the Hangout because computers are so awesome.
Right.
Oh.
How's everyone doing today?
Well.
Good. We've already talked about OS packaging.
Oh man, I missed the fun.
Well, to be fair, we didn't cover OS packaging. We covered
Ruby gems.
language packaging.
I gotcha. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge, right? And this is going to be my little blurb on like OS packaging or gems packaging or whatever. But like this is why curl bash exists basically, because all these things are not easy to get installed, and so and I have much more of I guess a vested interest in this now because like we have customers that want to use our product, and when they originally like built the product, they were like, yeah, just curl bash and grab the package and install it, and there's like all these little things that need to run, and there's this concept of like time to value, which is how quickly a customer can like download the app and start using it and be successful with it. And honestly, like you can't beat curl bash. Like it lets you encapsulate all the steps that are required to get up and running as fast as possible. I mean, like RVM, I think from the Ruby side is a great example of like, I guess the success of that, right? You just like curl bash rvm.io, and it's like boom, you get Ruby.
Yeah, I like what we do, where we get flack for having a curl bash installer, right? Because that's what people like to do, is they like to pick on anybody who does that kind of software installation. But here's the thing, what that script does is it finds out what operating system you're on, so it can go get your operating system specific package. Because every OS is different, and we need to have a unified way. We can't have an installation page that has, okay, if you're on this, do that. If you're on this, do that. If you're on this, and so on for the 12 different platforms that we support. That's untenable maintenance. But putting all that into a shell script and making that available to people through the API that it uses makes that something that people who want to skip that can do. So.
Right, and you guys do it for the same exact reason, which is you want to get customers up and running as fast as possible. And how I would bet before that existed, the number of people that would stop trying to use Chef before they even got it installed, because it was like step one, like set up your Ruby environment, like step two, like set up the right version of Ruby gems, grab the thing, install all the it's like it's just a giant pain.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a huge pain, and it certainly it decreased that time to value, right? It didn't take you half a day to get your local Ruby environment set up so that you could install the Chef gem, and made it super good. And then we were able to bring that to the Chef server installation, and then other projects could benefit from it as well. Because, like we were talking about earlier, when you look at platforms like Red Hat, Red Hat 5, that ship Python that is ancient. Like it was totally current in 2007 when CentOS 5 and Red Hat 5 came out. Like 2007, that was awesome. But that's 8 years ago. People who are making software in the last 3 years aren't using 8-year-old versions of the runtime, right? They want to use a current one. But you can't install the current one without like this gigantic yak coming in and shagging up, getting shaggy yak hair all over everywhere and like getting in your keyboard and all that stuff in order to get that working. So
yeah, I mean,
other
people
projects
who
are
are
able
writing,
to use Omnibus as well.
yeah, I mean the people who are writing software weren't writing software 8 years ago too. Like a lot of them.
Oh yeah, well think about all these projects that people are using now that didn't even exist, right? The everything from Vagrant on that HashiCorp has done is all new in the last few years.
Well, here, like, okay, so let's talk alternatives, right? Like, what I don't understand is, oh, curl bash is evil, but instead we want you to run a package, basically directly add this RPM, which adds this repo, and then run the installer, because that's the other alternative. And don't even get me started on, so you just downloaded this source code and started compiling it, because that works too. Or my favorite is, if anybody's ever done an Oracle install, you're going to basically run a shell script that has like CPIO inside the shell script that comes out and like, I just don't understand it, like people's thing. Like the shtick just doesn't make sense to me. I really actually like the curl bash because the first thing I do is I take the bash off the end of it and I run curl and I go, oh, I understand what this shell script does.
Right, and that's the other thing about it, right? If you have curl bash as the only thing, like it doesn't even install a package, it just like splatters your file system with a bunch of whatever. Okay, you can go look at what that script is actually going to do. Whereas when you download and install a package, who knows what it's doing? Like you have to unpack the package with whatever the package management tool is, and then go inspect the file system of wherever it does its unpacking. Like when you have a deb and you do an apt-get download only or whatever, you go through this, apt goes through these steps that it will have those packages exploded out on the file system. You can go inspect the contents and find out what the post install are, but is that any more easy to reason about than just reading the shell script?
And here's the beauty of that, right? What language, what scripts are those being ran for post-install, pre-install? They're all bash.
bin-sh.
Yeah, like bin-sh or bash, right? So.
Or dash.
The other thing I've seen too is like the main reason I've raged on this more is just because over the past few months I've been. So while I understand, curl bash time to value, it's really quick to get up and running. At the same time, we're a security company, and I'd like to serve packages that are signed via signed repo and all that good stuff. So over the past few months, I've been actually working on new package builds and conforming to the standard and cleaning up a bunch of other stuff. But it also means actually going through all the OSs that we support, which admittedly aren't a ton. I mean, it's nowhere near what you guys do at Chef. I mean, we support CentOS, RHEL, Amazon, so those three are pretty much all the same, and then all the Ubuntus really. But even then, it's just the differences enough between Debian and RPM in even just how to sign packages and how to create the repos. The most enjoyable thing I found was an 8-year-old bug where you can't sign RPMs with a PGP subkey. So So that kind of just destroys any concept of security.
So Package Cloud has a blog post on GPG sign and verify RPM packages in Yum repositories. Have you seen that?
No, I should check it out.
I pasted it into the chat.
So yeah, I mean, so that's a great example. The other thing I found too, people talk about curl bash as very insecure and et cetera, which I think it's it's probably a similar level of security because I found a vulnerability in the RPM where when you sign the package, and I'd have to look to get the exact details, but essentially the gist was that when you signed the package, it was only checking the signature against the metadata and not the actual content of the package. And most RPM repos are served up over HTTP because people are like, well, I'm signing the package, so you'll know if it's been changed in transit. Well, not if we're not checking the actual content of the package. So, okay, great. So now I'm downloading this thing. Oh, the metadata checks out, great, but the scripts inside of it could be completely, taken over in transit. That's not something that we've ever seen before, right? Like people hijacking binaries in flight. And how many people have SSL repos out there? I mean, I went through a lot of trouble to SSL our repos, especially after finding, that RPM bug. So it's it's just kind of comical.
Well, so there's two fun directions we can take this, right? There's the Docker story, because there was a recent discussion around the way they are signing stuff, or there's just the Solaris is just as horrible, right? Like actually cryptographically signing anything is a pain in the ass. Does anyone actually verify those? And then my favorite, and I wish Sean was not in Europe right now because I would drag his butt into this conversation. You can't actually disable pre and post scripts in Debs.
Right. The way that you do that. You can do that, and the way that you do that is you change the user bin update rc.d, or no, invoke rc.d. There's a script that you update, and you just have it exit 0. Like that is the Debian developer recommended way if you want to disable post-install scripts. Is you change a file on your a system file that came from a package to not execute those scripts.
Well, and I think I think Sean's solution to this I think it was MySQL actually, to keep it from starting, is he overloaded the path, or basically laid down some files in temp, overloaded the path so that it would return bin true, or symlinks to bin true for the things that got called in the script that he didn't want to run.
Yep.
And it worked.
Yep.
You can't tell me that that's secure, right? Like, we don't want this to run, so we're going to overload the path so that it doesn't run. Yeah. So many fun directions. So, you guys pick.
Here it is. I found it. There is a repository that Dan DeLeo has created, and it's called Cynical.
Uh-oh.
And it has a pre-install script.
This is phenomenal.
Right?
Oh, that's horrible.
All it does is just curl bash, but but you can make it as an RPM.
And you can sign it too.
And you can sign it, and you can serve it over an HTTPS Yum repo that's GPG signed and everything else. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your packages are, like how you make yourself feel good that you've done something with a package, because you can still do horrible things within the package, or what somebody has perceived as being horrible. Because I don't think that our install SH script is horrible.
Well, there was I don't know if you guys saw this. There was a pull request or an issue in GitHub for the Steam Linux client or something like that, where if you moved the default Steam directory and to another place and you did an upgrade or something basically, and essentially it would you're upgrading, I'll just rm-rf this whole thing, right? Because the package is, again, it's coming with scripts in it that,
assume a thing about itself.
It makes these assumptions and stuff like that, and so I always want to have that discussion with someone who's curl bash is the devil, you should never use it. It's well, what are you concerned about? Because are you concerned that it's not? I'm still trying to get a good
So I posted out on the Twitters about this last December, and the best objection that I've seen in this is that the thing that you're doing is not easily reproducible. Like the way that you reproduce it is you rerun that installer script again. But the problem is that that installer script lives out on the internet somewhere that somebody else updated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like look at Homebrew. Homebrew changes their installer script all the time, and they do it to work around changes in OS 10, to work around changes in dependent things that they have. Like you need to have GCC, and so we need to put things in place so that GCC can build your packages correctly, all that sort of thing, right? So Homebrew changes their installer script. Sure, it's on GitHub, it's an open source project, you can watch the changes as they occur, but nobody has control over that other than the people who can publish to the Homebrew project. So, that can change and then not be able to reproduce a system. And sysadmins love this idea that you can absolutely perfectly reproduce every single bit of your infrastructure, because that's totally possible. And I'm totally being sarcastic because that's not actually what reality is. But we like to think, we like to give ourselves these warm, fuzzy feelings that we can do this because we have a config management system, because we've mirrored all of the package repositories from upstream. Well, what happens if our mirror goes down and we have to rebuild it? Did you keep a list of every single package at the version that it was on that mirror before it went down? No. Nobody does that. Like, you say you do that, but nobody actually does that because who has time to do that?
We take a ZFS snapshot. No, I'm kidding. That's the solution, right? Well, okay, but there's an interesting point here that gets missed with curl bash, is that it is completely reproducible. You know why? Because I can just make a copy of that, so I can pull out the
now, let's not get crazy here. I mean, we're only downloading the entire internet to make our package mirror. Why would we copy down this script that we're trying to avoid using?
You mean that script that well, and here's the crazy part for me, right? Like, frequently what I ended up doing is, I've got to go install this thing, and I am doing it from internal mirrors. So what I did was I would go I borrow, whatever you want to call it, the install.sh, go do a set on the stupid thing to put in my repo instead of the repo, the upstream repo. And hey, what do you know? I've got an installer that works against my internal infrastructure. I can host it internally, and I just run curl to bash from internal infrastructure. And this is actually super important, right? Because if you're in an environment where there ain't no way out to the internet, because that's a thing.
Super much very is a thing. Like all the emphasis I can place on that being a thing, I would put on that being a thing, because that's totally a thing.
And which was weird for me, right? Because I come from the land of I had an IP address. I had a public IPv6 address along with the public IPv4 address on my desk, and not just had it on my desk, but there was no firewall between me and the rest of the internet.
Your computer has a firewall on it. It's probably fine.
With the distinct exception of, I think there was some IDS going on. There's unfettered access to the internet.
It sounds like a university.
Yeah, it was a university. There's nothing cooler than standing looking at a rack and going, "That's campus," and then taking a step to the left and going, "Those 10 gig links coming in, that's the internet," because we were a node on the they still are, but a node on the backbone for the state of California. Internet 2, gotta love it. But yeah, we get so caught up in such minutia about packaging and whatnot, and we still can't get the basics right. How many times have you tried to get a sane version of Groovy installed on your box, or how many times have you run into I want to add this collect D as my favorite, right? Where it's oh, we found this repo over here that has a modern version of collect D. Oh, ooh. Because there's these weird transitive dependencies that no one thought about, and now you're screwed.
Collect D is my favorite one. So at a previous company, they were fond of running slightly older versions of non-Linux operating systems, and installing collect D, a lot of dependencies, and you want them to be kind of all in the same version. So the normal answer would be like, oh yeah, so just update all, like, so the one party would be like, well, this shouldn't be a problem if you're running modern OS. It's like, great, well, I live in the reality where it's not like we're going to upgrade the entire fleet to the newest, latest, greatest, whatever. Like, that's not going to happen. So it's basically like, how do we get the X version of Collectd that we need with like whatever graphite support, the right HTTP support plugin on it. And so it was like my most glorious thing, which was, and I couldn't get Python, like, system Python, because like that would conflict with whatever stuff was already right on there. So it's like, let's break out the omnibus, right? And so it was the greatest, like, F you to all the like Ruby haters. Be like, hey, buddy, I'm going to use some Ruby to package you some Pythons, so that we can get Collectd in place on all these nodes. Like, suck it.
Well,
and it totally worked, right? Like, I was like, mission accomplished. We have the same version of Collectd running everywhere with all of the dependencies that we need, and I got to move, like 2 days later, moved on with my life to another problem.
Well, and I'm so tired of hearing people like bash on Collectd, or not Collectd, I'm sorry, Omnibus, because it's like, yes, it sucks. Yes, it's horrible. Guess what? The rest of us, we used to do that. The difference is we built every single thing from freaking source. And back in the old days when we only managed like 50 boxes, we just compiled from source on every single box because it worked. Granted, you ended up with 15 different versions of Perl across the infrastructure. And let's not even talk about the fact that CPAN doesn't. I still don't think there's a good way to do like programmatic CPAN installs.
Well, what version of source is the real question, right? Like, because can you get it? Did you mirror every single version that you used at that time to compile from, or were you pulling from upstream? Because
anybody ever used an Apache Software Foundation project and tried to get like an old version of, say, ActiveMQ or any of that? Because a lot of the mirrors yank the old versions, and I've had to maintain cookbooks that I had written with a point-in-time release that totally works, but then 6 months later that version isn't available anymore, and now I have to update all these attributes.
It's crazy how that works, right? Like, man, and as you say that, I've been doing this too long because, like, one of these days we're just going to have like a Hang-Ops episode where we all come together and tell stories of yore. Like, my favorite one, the Apache 1.x branch didn't use the correct system calls to allocate memory or to open files rather in Solaris. So if your log file happened to grow larger than 2 gigs, because you've had students managing your web server, you can't actually restart Apache. Mm-hmm. Oops. So yeah, we'll have to have a Hang-Ops episode of that where we all just get together and tell stories of the things that we would never think were even an issue.
I'll record myself telling all my IBM war stories so that we can keep that off of there, and I'll just not join because otherwise I'll just listen to myself talk for an hour.
Oh. But the interesting thing about this is, all of our bitching and complaining aside, like, I wouldn't give up having packages. Like, been there, done that.
Yeah, packages are pretty cool.
It's a pain in the ass sometimes, but, and I think that's what scares me with Docker, right? Is that I feel like Docker, a lot of what it is right now is, let's go back to the days where we just write a shell script to automate building our system. And then,
a shell script to automate building our golden image that we're then going to stamp out and then ship that everywhere. Which Docker isn't that, but it feels like it is, right? Like, when I look at the way that people are using it, that seems to be the use case. Is that you're replacing basically what was golden image management.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, I see a lot of value in Docker. There's a lot of neat stuff going on there, but
absolutely.
I've been struggling a lot with but I guess that's technology in general. It's, let's toss the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not use any of the technologies we already know work.
Oh yeah, let's invent another package manager, because they're there isn't enough already, right?
Isn't there a I think it's all the Haskell people who are into it, the Nix packaging, Nix OS stuff.
There
That is
are
a
people who like Haskell that also like Nix. I don't know that I would go so far as all of them.
Not all Haskellers.
I didn't say that.
um,
But
I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know anything about it. I just know what I see on Twitter. I didn't know if anyone had used it or had opinions on it. But
I haven't
people whose opinions I respect seem to give it a lot of praise. So I always kind of take notice when I see stuff like that.
Yeah, I've not looked into it really myself because I have a solution for it already that I like.
Yeah, I haven't looked at Nix either. The one that's been interesting is seeing all the talk about CoreOS recently. And to be frank, someone from CoreOS was on the changelog recently, and it kind of actually scared me because their vision was very much so, oh, well, we can handle all your updates for you. And, like, I get it, but at the same time, I got scared. But maybe that was just my inner sysadmin being scared of inappropriate things. I don't know. Go listen to the changelog. It's a great episode. So, with that, we're getting close to the hour. Were there any other things that we wanted to talk about? Paul, you've been super quiet.
Yeah, I've been pretty quiet listening to you guys talk. I guess one thing I want to mention, it's been around the Twitters and stuff, but Container Days Austin is happening. It is May this is where I don't remember what day my own conference is on. It's like May the 27th and 28th, I think. Yeah, no, March 27th, 28th. And it's Container Days Austin. So if you're interested in Dockers and other container technologies, we're specifically not calling ourselves Docker Days because we want it open to other container tech. Come and check it out. It's pretty cheap. It's a day and a half unconference.
But will there be breakfast tacos is the question.
Absolutely. There will be breakfast tacos.
Because I hear that that's the reason I need to come to Austin is breakfast tacos. But that does look interesting. What I do appreciate is that we're at least starting to hear a little less around the, oh my God, we had this in Solaris and BSD jails forever, and it's just like, no.
Yeah, so here's gonna be this is kind of my response on that one, and again, like I remember when like a lot of that stuff came out, and I was like, this is amazing, this is the coolest thing ever. Played around with it, but it didn't win for a reason, and a lot of the reasons had to do with like the user experience was terrible. Like, why was Vagrant so popular? Because the user experience for what you were doing with it was amazing. I mean, it made something that was in the past a pain in the butt to do. I mean, VirtualBox had been around forever and all these other tools, but it was just that right amount of glue code, and it turned into so much more, and it made the user experience so much better. And that's why people were all amazed on Docker, because they took LXC containers, which is a pain in the ass.
It has one of the worst user experiences I have ever had with software.
It's terrible, right? And
I've used software for a while.
I think the best one, a good example of like something that so I was during the holidays, I was playing around with Mesos because I saw that they had like Docker support. I'm like, oh, like maybe that's the missing link, right? Because Docker by itself is not going to save you. Like that's now you have two problems, kind of solution, right? Mm-hmm. So the real
one of those problems is really cool.
Yeah, exactly. You got a really cool problem that it's yours now, but. So I was playing around with Mesos a little bit, and looking at the Docker, support for it, and I was trying to figure out like, all right, like how to submit a job for a container or whatever, and it's like create this thing and post this JSON to this endpoint. I'm like, wow, like that's a terrible user experience, right? Like, great, like it's early and that's cool, like get it out there, but like it's not like Mesos with Docker is not going to take over the world unless they solve that problem. I have no doubt that they will probably do a good job at that, but a lot of these like container orchestration things that are going to hopefully help with the packaging aspect, I feel like are still in their infancy where, so many people that I talk to who are doing it are just like investing an obscene amount of time in programming that glue code. And then, what's going to happen like 2 or 3 years from now, it's like all that freaking tech debt that they've accumulated from the way they've done it, and now it's going to be like, well, that's the way we've always done it with this 2-year monolithic code base to manage our microservice architecture. It's like...
Are you talking about System D, or are you talking about Docker?
Well, okay, so microservices is a whole nother adventure, right? Like, we can rail on that for forever. Like, the concept is great, but there's some interesting discussions there.
I mean, the long and short of it is, like, you couldn't ask for a better time to be, like, kind of in our field, like, with the amount of really interesting things out there that, we're no longer forced to only run, like, Solaris or, BSD or whatever. Like, we're no longer forced to run Docker. I mean, like, there's a lot of the stuff that's abstracted, other things that have abstracted LXC that makes it easy, to if you just want to use raw LXC. I mean, you can... Hell, just go back to freaking BSD jails. Like, get SmartOS and crank that up. Smart Data Center, the joint Smart Data Center stuff is legit. And if I had a, actually they might have open sourced it, but
they did. Smart Data Center, like their whole stack is all open source now.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I was looking at paying money for it because that's how legit it was. So now that it's free,
you should still probably pay money for it because otherwise you have to build it and install it yourself, and you're not Joyent, and Joyent is really good at doing that. And if you give them money, then you don't have to do it.
Yeah, it's the same reason I give money to the electrician and the plumber. It's because they're trained professionals, right?
Yeah, and you're like a random guy with a wrench and your pliers, and it's like it's going to end badly because I know I'm in the same boats.
Well, and it's funny just even thinking about the Solaris thing, right? Like, to this day, I still miss zones. Solaris zones were badass, but they still have the same problem that I see with Docker in a lot of ways. The network stuff is still a disaster.
Well, Crossbow is like this super crazy, complicated, capable system. The network stack on Lumos, and it's really featureful, and you can do a lot with it. You can run an entire virtualized VLAN thing on your laptop if your laptop's running Solaris, but getting there there's just way too much to learn
and I looked at, like, I haven't looked at Crossbow in a long time. It wasn't fully baked when I had made the switch over. But I mean, because at the end of the day, all that I wanted was the containers to run in one network, the underlying hardware to run in another network, and them not to share a routing table.
Yeah.
Good luck with that, at least in Solaris 10. Like, that wasn't a thing. So with that said, we are right at about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I say we call it because my tummy is rumbly, and it is time for some lunch. So thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll be back next week. I'm sure we'll find something random and interesting to talk about, because we always do. But we'll see y'all later.
Certainly be off topic.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
See ya.